Good morning, everybody. Morning. It is an honor and privilege to be here, opening the 4th edition of the Nordic Infrastructure Conference, or NIC among friends. We are around 1,200 delegates here, represented from 14 nations. We'll be running around 77 different sessions with 44 different speakers. That will be around 80,000 hours of training, making it by far the biggest IT Pro conference in the Nordics, and you're part of it. We have 23 MVPs here, all the way from Australia, Belgium, Poland, USA, UK, Finland, Netherlands, Sweden, and Denmark. And of course, 7 MVPs from Norway. Microsoft was built on you guys and girls. You are the ones that take it from what I do, PowerPoints, to real solutions. I meet regularly with IT leaders from the companies that you represent. So whether I talk about data center, the future of data center with Sven Tore Kaasa at Telecomputing, or how to scale software into the cloud with Øystein Moan from Visma, it all centers around you. We are dependent on your expertise and industry knowledge to make those solutions come through. The IT employs in Norway about 90,000 people. Unfortunately, they're not all here. I wish they were. But we do offer free training through the Microsoft Virtual Academy. So I encourage you, when you go back, to encourage your colleagues to take training to make sure we get upskilled. IT is playing a more and more important part of society and our lives. And the opportunity for us then is enormous. Take healthcare. We need to lift healthcare and improve healthcare. We have to help doctors and nurses spend less time on administration and more time taking care of patients. So our job is to realize the vision of one patient, one journal, and one system. It's a huge task, but it's one that we have to go deliver. We have to give our children better education. Imagine being able to Skype with a class in India to learn about India. Must be much more exciting than reading a book from 2004 about India. And there we have a role to play. Allowing all SMB customers to take advantage of the new technology that was before only limited to the large organizations, helping them focus on selling shoes and cutting hair instead of worrying about IT. That is our job. These are pretty well-known industries, but what about agriculture and farming? How can IT help around agriculture and farming? Today, technology, we can put a sensor in the ground at the farm that measures the soil. It sends this data into the cloud through machine learning back out to an analytics platform, which shows us what is needed in the soil. And we can send 2 pallets of fertilizer to the farm in Hedmark before the farmer even wakes up. That is the power of technology. There are many of these opportunities that we can go after, and also technology is shifting fast. Microsoft bought Minecraft. And you might say, why? But if you now add gaming technology with business needs, you can imagine walking, put on your HoloLens, walk at 2,000-meter depth on the bottom of the North Sea, analyzing the ocean floor, all through a virtual world in a dry office in Stavanger. It's now possible. So I think, and I think you also know, that the future might not be, for IT professionals, changing backup disks for an Exchange server. That is not the future. The future is actually us leveraging the cloud and other technologies to free up time so that we can spend our time helping the farmer or the oil industry or that SMB customer. So let's kick off this year's NIC opening keynote and get somebody on stage who knows what they talk about. He is a hailed favorite technology author by the industry. He's written over 43 books. He's held hundreds of presentations globally. This best-selling author, popular tech columnist, commentator, and IT consultant join us today to make this a spectacular infrastructure conference. So please welcome Mark Minasi.
Hi, everybody. I want to thank you initially for two things. One, thanks for coming in for the keynote. You could have slept later. And two, letting me do this in English because my Norwegian is, well, non-existent, you know. So I'm here to talk about the cloud today. Does that sound like a good topic? I can do something else if you like. I just, you know, this is the one I prepped for you. So the thing up there says that I'm a senior cloudnostic. Where that comes from is that I'm not here to pick on the cloud, but I hear a tremendous amount about the cloud. We all do. I just think it's my job to point out the good stuff and the bad stuff, okay? So, and honestly, and let me just do a little side comment here that I never do. But I got asked to do this. I've been asked to do this for the last few years, and I'm always busy at the particular time that this conference is on. And I thought this was a regional conference, which it is, of course. It's a Norwegian conference. I speak with a lot of regional conferences, and that usually means that I'm the only person from outside of the country that's going to be here. Now, I like coming to Norway. I've done it before, but I thought it's going to be great to be here. So several months ago, Per, who hired me, announced that I was going to be Keynote, and whenever I was in Europe, my speaker buddies, there's this international community of speakers. They're like, how did you get to Keynote, Nick? I was like, Nick? What's Nick? They're like, oh, you idiot. Nick is this awesome show. I said, really? And I looked around at the speaker list, and it's not just people from here. I'm just like, I'm astounded. My friend John Craddock, who knows everything about infrastructure, did a great pre-con yesterday. His stuff is great. Paula from Poland, everybody knows. Who's better at security than Paula? We got Andy Malone. Andy does all kinds of stuff. He has some terrific security talks that you will greatly enjoy. He's an Office 365 guy as well. He's doing some talks along those lines. Johan and Michael are talking, although they're not talking together. What's up with that? You know? I hope it's not bad news. If you don't know Sami Leo yet, you're going to. He's from Finland. He's a super smart guy. I've been running into him for conferences for 5 years. He knows everything, does a fantastic set of Windows troubleshooting talks. He's been talking about the future of Windows. I had to write this all down because there's so many of these guys I couldn't remember. If you don't know Alexander from Serbia, I can't pronounce his last name like I can't pronounce Paula's last name, so I'm not going to try. He is Mr. PowerShell. Alexander is so crazy about PowerShell. If I write a column about PowerShell, which I do, I try to avoid him for the next 6 months. He'll say, you know, Mark, there's one thing that you ought to get. All right, fine. But he's going to do that. He said, I am a directory services MVP. Michael mentioned there were MVPs. I'm one of them, my directory services MVP. Two of my buddies, Raymond Cornelius and Sandra Burkauer, are going to do a couple of talks on joining yourself to the cloud. If you've been to the show before, of course you know Alec DeYoung. So there's just, oh, and what am I saying? Special guest star, Wally Mead. Wally Mead is in the house. So I'm nervous because these are really good speakers. So let's just see how I do, all right? So I say hello, welcome, and maybe welcome back. This is I did a cloud. In 2009, people asked me to come do talks like this, and so I need a good keynote. Many times that keynote is going to be what's new in Windows. I've been doing that for a long, long time. So, but then in 2009, I was in trouble. It's like, what am I going to do? There's nothing new coming out. But I kept hearing this word, cloud. I'm like, something just seemed like marketing. Could you just smell the marketing? And I thought, I'll bet I can figure some stuff out about this. So how many of you saw my earlier talk about the cloud? Has anybody seen my earlier talk in any place? One of you. Okay. Well, it was a big hit, as you can see. In the Nordics, but hey, it killed in Iceland. I mean, you know. No, seriously, in Iceland, both IT pros were at the conference. So the thing is this. Here was what I did. I don't have degrees in computers. My degrees are in economics. I got 3 economics degrees. I'm trained to the PhD level. When I got out of school, that's what I did for a while. I was actually a Washington economist. You know, Harry Truman once said, "Find me a one-armed economist." Harry Truman, former president of the United States. They said, "Why do you want a one-armed economist, Harry?" He said, "So that he cannot say, 'on the other hand,' you know?" So my job was I was a fortune teller for the US government for a while. I predicted the future. Now, we economists are great at predicting things. We have predicted 9 of the last 2 economic recoveries. And so I thought that I knew some things about the cloud, knowing nothing else. You know what I knew about the cloud? I knew that it is capital intensive. What does that mean? That means you spend a lot of money on machines and software and bandwidth and not much money on people. The good thing about this stuff is you buy it and it doesn't go on strike, you see? So that means you can run your business differently. Capital intensive. I also knew that it was increasing returns to scale. What's that mean? It means you got to be big or go home. It means the only way to make money in the cloud business is you have to be one of the biggest players. You got to be one of the big dogs. And I knew in 2009, and it's still true, that in 10 years, there will be, if we're lucky, 4 big players, maybe 2, maybe 3. And knowing that, I could make some predictions, and 4 of my predictions came out really good, which is great for an economist, you know. And so Per said to me, "You want to do a talk?" I said, "I have this great cloud talk," and Per's like everywhere, so he says, "We've already heard that talk, Mark. Do a new one." And I said, "You know, that's not a bad idea. Let's just go back and do it again as if I had never seen this stuff before." So we're going to do, you know, let's see what we know in 2015. In the interest of honesty, though, I should confess that I missed a couple of really big things. Well, really big things. I believe I can be forgiven. I believe that I can be forgiven for having missed them. First was, you guys, how many of you are in the cloud, have some kind of cloud thing going on? Office 365, Amazon infrastructure, etc. Oh, wow. So you all like the cloud. Okay, I'm going to stand behind the podium here then, okay? Right. So I didn't think you'd do that quickly. I figured we'd all be standing on the edge of the water, waiting for one guy to get in and give us the shark report, you know? But you all adopted it, and you know what I forgot? I forgot one of the most important words I'm going to use today, cheap. Amazon cut the price on their cloud services 26 times in 2 years. And Microsoft always followed them. And Microsoft says, when Amazon cuts, we're going to cut. That's when I say to the Microsoft guys, "So you're telling me you could have been doing it cheaper all this time, but you..." So cheap. And notice, for clip art, I found like Norwegian kroner. Do I get some love for that? Come on. Come on. All right. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Do you have any idea how... And I hadn't been here for a while, so I couldn't remember whether that was a lot of money or not a lot of money. So I've been here for a day, so it's like almost a beer. Yeah. So it's just... How do you people live here? God. That was the first thing I got wrong. Second thing I got wrong was I forgot that you love mobility. We love mobility. And mobility, you ain't got no mobility unless you got the cloud. And I'm saying that to a crowd of people who statistically check their smartphones 150 to 221 times per day. I see you doing it now. Oh, you're being very good about not looking. That's very nice about you. You're just not looking at the moment. Okay? All right. So that's basically, that was my first. So what are we going to do? What's this talk about? Let's talk about how big the cloud is, because that's an interesting question. Is it just something that gets a lot of draw, or is it really important? I'll tell you some cloud stories. Honestly, I have to tell you, how many of you have heard a talk about the cloud industry before? Is that everybody? Yes? Okay. There's a pattern to these talks. Even though I did one of the first ones, I noticed there's a pattern, and so I'm going to be a certain traditionalist. We got to have cloud stories. It's got to be a happy story. I'll give you a happy cloud story. Then we'll talk about IaaS, SaaS, and PaaS. I'll bet most of you know what those stand for. I really don't want to spend a lot of time defining them. I will do it briefly for the few of you who need it. But I do want to say, I'll say, okay, let's go back and look at these guys, and what are people doing with them? Are they successful? What are the pros? What are the cons? I think I have some some useful things about that. And I'm going to show you more than those ases. We got some other ases as well that I want to talk about. I want to talk about people saying that everybody should be in the cloud. Many people should be, not everybody should though. Perhaps the most important thing is trust and privacy in the cloud. And there's some really big things that have happened very, very recently I want to talk about. Then I'll put my economist hat on again and we'll do some more predictions. How's that sound? Yes, let's do that. Because I'm going to make you guys all economists in just a few minutes. We're going to do instant economists when we come up with the cloud size stuff. And then we'll finish this talk with just 5 words. Just 5 words will summarize this entire talk. And with hope, at that point, I'll be done. So first of all, how big is the cloud? Why do you care? At some point, the boss is going to say, hey, all of my golf buddies are in the cloud. How come we're not in the cloud? And so it's a conversation that you want to have. I mean, and by the way, this conversation, what did I say to you? What's the most important word right now in the cloud? Cheap. A lot of conversations where the CEO is talking to the CIO. And the CEO is saying to the CIO, why are we not in the cloud? And the CIO says, it's a good idea, boss. We get a lot of benefits from it, but we're worried about security. Who's going to get to our data? Can we really put our stuff in there? Are they going to data mine our stuff? And the boss says, I don't think you're understanding this. My buddies are all saving so much money in IT that it's insane. They're saving so much money that if we don't go to the cloud, we're going to be the most secure organization in the business that's out of business because we got no customers because they save so much money in the cloud. So we'll talk about how big is that. Now, if you wanted to know how big the cloud was, what's the first thing you would do? Come on. You would? I heard it. You would Google. Well, no. Hey, we got the country manager of Microsoft here. We would Bing it. We would Bing it. I like Bing because Bing has the secret in it. Why is it called Bing? No one knows. No one knows. But the theory, this is not true, but I like it, is that Bing stands for because it's not Google. Right? I'm sure not. So I Binged it. And then I Googled it. And I got numbers from like $2 billion to $150 billion. Which I know the kroner's strong. That's like 50 kroner, but still, it's, you know. So let's think about this, okay? Now, given that this is supposedly an industry being run by adults, the fact that we come up with numbers between 2 billion and 150 means something's wrong here. And in fact, having been a statistical economics guy, we call that numerological proctology. I don't know if that translates. But given that range, I think that we can do as well for our own. So you want to be economists for a few minutes? Okay, all right, good. So we're going to need some numbers. Now, we need some numbers to start from. The way that I'm going to do this is I'm going to say, let's find the best numbers we can and use them as a jumping off point. What are the best numbers we can find? You know what? Nobody completely reports their cloud revenues. No one's doing it yet. They don't want to be the first one to show it, you know? Amazon gets closest. Amazon reports their cloud revenues, and they're probably the largest player at the time. They may not be in a year, they certainly are now. Amazon has an area on their books called Other. Now, it's not just cloud. Analysts say it's about 80%. So that's why my next step is I'm going to say, okay, as of 29 January, Amazon reported their fourth quarter, so we know 2014 numbers. Turned out to be 5.4 billion. I'm going to say round that down to 4 billion, because it's not all cloud stuff. So let's say Amazon brought in $4 billion on their cloud stuff. Does this sound reasonable so far? This is the important thing. If you're going to make stuff up, it's got to sound reasonable, and you have to document your methods. That's why this is not numerological proctology. This is economics. It's very important. Economics pays better. So both Satya at Microsoft and somebody at IBM bought up a bunch of cloud companies, and they're trying to become a cloud player, and they did fairly well. Satya said that Microsoft was running, he didn't exactly say this, but he said 4.4 billion. But again, a lot of the things Microsoft calls cloud, we would not call cloud. Like the SPLA licensing and that sort of thing, we probably wouldn't call cloud. Same thing for IBM. I'm going to whack some of that off there too. Let's just say 3 billion for Microsoft and 3 billion for IBM. Sound reasonable? Google is large, but in terms of their cloud business, they're not really generating a lot of revenue yet. They're doing that, they're doing that Amazon thing in the old days where they'll just keep throwing stuff at it. So I'm gonna say, let's just say, so from there we could say like, let's say 4 billion for Amazon, 3 for IBM, 3 for Microsoft, 2 for the other guys. And that's gonna give us like $12 billion. Does that seem like an unreasonable number to anybody? This is how we do economics. Okay, so $12 billion, let's call it $12 billion. How big is that? Is 12 billion, is that a big industry? Is that a small industry? Let me give you a data point. The sum total of money that Americans pay to have people deliver pizza to their houses is $27 billion a year. So the cloud is half a pizza, which, you know, is good. I mean, you know, maybe it'll be like a whole pizza pretty soon, you know, so that's the kind of numbers. You get other interesting numbers if you look at how much people have invested. That's way more money. You look at the amount of money that Microsoft invested in the cloud, about $14 billion investment. Google more than that, I think 16 or something. Amazon, about 12 billion. So everyone's doing that. If you build it, they will come. And by the way, that's the right way to do it. There's not going to be a lot of players, so if you want to be a player, you got to get started now. Okay? So another interesting thing, there's a survey about what cloud customers think, and this was a good survey. As a guy who did surveys, I tracked this, they did a nice job with this. IDG did a nice job with it. They asked a lot of 1,700 organizations, what are you doing with the cloud? 70% of them were in the cloud. 70% were in the cloud. Okay? 38% had identified entirely what goes in the cloud. That seems crazy to me because the cloud changes so quickly. The rate of change in the cloud is just so absolutely amazing. They'll have to do it again next year. Really fascinating one. I like the cloud. I don't know that I trust my life to it. And yet 15% of the organization said they didn't have any IT stuff on premises. They were all in the cloud. 15%, another 6% they were going to get that done by 2016. That's interesting. Anybody here entirely in the cloud? Is anybody here entirely in the cloud? Yeah, I don't see too many hands when I ask that question. So I thought it was interesting that the survey came up with that. Some people left the cloud. Why? Number one reason, security. They were worried about security. Number two reason, this is interesting. How many of you are a little worried about your job because of the cloud? We're IT pros. Is anybody even a little bit worried that the cloud is going to affect your job? I'm not getting a lot of hands here. Used to get half the room. And why? Because we've all figured out, you know, it's not like we got so much free time, right? You know? How many of you are changing passwords every day? You know, we don't do that stuff anymore. Well, the number two reason was they had to hire too many IT pros because the cloud created all these new jobs and these new requirements. The number three reason was they had to hire too many new help desk people. It's a big question. 74% who stayed were confident of the security. And here's the best number. The question was, did you raise or lower the IT headcount? 20% said that they were able to cut their IT staff. 17% said they'd have to bump them up. So I'm going to call that a wash. So there's some interesting numbers, I thought. Okay, time for a heartwarming cloud story. Kind of a story about how rescued stray dogs are saved by the cloud or something. I looked and looked. This is the best one that I could find with just a little bit of looking. Apparently, if you're in the Bitcoin business, if you want to build, you know, currency that can be used on the dark web to buy assassinations, then the cloud is apparently the platform for you. So, well, I don't know who this guy is, but somebody drew a cartoon of him and he put the spots on him. Is that measles? Is he from America or something like that? I wouldn't have measles on my face if a guy. All right, here's a better one. You want a better one? Do a better one. Have you guys heard of the Cassini probe? You certainly have. The one that's been out at Saturn for like 10, 14, 16 years has never had an oil change, and it's been working all this time. Doing a great job. It produces these awesome pictures like this one. This is a picture with the probe behind Saturn looking at the sun through it. It's not an eclipse like we have where the sun's entirely blocked out because Saturn is largely cloud. That's why it has this wonderful, beautiful, backlit kind of look to it. Moments like this make me feel not so bad about paying taxes, you know. And So there's actually another interesting one. They've taken this shot a few times. If you look around, you can find one where down in the lower right-hand corner, there's a little pale blue dot. You can actually see the Earth in comparison. It's awesome stuff. Now, when they get this, though, they get raw images. How many of you do photography out there? Okay, so you get the raw images, and somebody's got to Photoshop these things. And so JPL, the Jet Propulsion Laboratory, does that. They don't really do Photoshop. They have programs that are like Photoshop that do the work. And they have lots and lots of processing systems. Well, recently, 180,000 images were downloaded. I'm like, why? Don't they get them a little bit at a time? Why 180,000? Was it a bandwidth issue? I mean, like, we found out the Cassini probe was downloading porn, and so it didn't have enough. I couldn't get the whole story. Anyway, so 180,000 images. I guess there was going to be a congressional hearing. They needed those suckers dealt with quickly. They figured out that the servers at JPL, very powerful servers, would collectively take 15 days to get that done. So they decided to spin up about 60 machines on Amazon, and with that, they were able to get the job done in 5 hours. And I saved the best for last. It cost $200. Is that a heartwarming cloud story? Yes, yes. All right. We've checked that box. Checked that box. All right. It's important to know your IaaS. Okay, that didn't come out the way I haven't done this talk before. You find these things. Anyway, well, let's see. There's three kinds of IaaSes out there. IaaS, infrastructure as a service, PaaS, platform as a service, and SaaS, software as a service. Let's see what they are. So IaaS is the easiest one. It's infrastructure as a service. We used to call it hardware as a service. It was HaaS, became IaaS. And how many of you have ever done a virtual machine in the cloud? So some of you, okay. A minority of you, but a big minority. Let's talk about this. The basic idea is the simplest one to understand. I'm hoping everyone knows what a virtual machine is, okay? The idea is that I'm Amazon, I'm Microsoft, I'm Google, I'm whoever, and I buy racks and racks and racks of machines, and I run some kind of hypervisor. Amazon uses Zen, Microsoft obviously uses Hyper-V, and you just say, I want an imaginary machine. I want this many CPUs, I want this much RAM, and great. I charge you by the minute, by the hour, by the week, by the year, whatever, for the use of that stuff. This saves you the trouble of having to call up Dell or HP and have them deliver a server to you. Does that make sense? Is that okay? Straightforward? Anybody troubled by it? Okay, good, good, good. So virtually all cloud customers, one survey I saw from a company called RightScale, they had talked to 250 clients. I don't know that it was a great survey, but it was a good one. 98% of the clients had at least IaaS, okay? How does it affect us? It affects us very little, because maintaining a virtual machine on Amazon or an Azure virtual machine or anybody else's virtual machine, it's the same stuff. When it's Patch Tuesday, did anybody see the Patch Tuesday? Did anybody look at your Patch Tuesday this morning? For the first time, I have patches, over 1 gigabyte of patches. It's not like a service pack. It's just big patch day. And there's a very, very scary Active Directory vulnerability that has been largely, but not entirely, patched by this. So if you're not patching, get on your phones now and get, to do your System Center thing or whatever to make those patches get on there right now. Yeah. Anyway, so lowest impact on us, we have to maintain them, we have to worry about security on them and stuff like that. That's good news. It's easy to understand. It misses out on cloud innovation, though, and I'll talk about that in just a minute. But so a friend of mine, a couple friends of mine, are building a new game, one of these massive multiplayer, blah, 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 blah kinds of games. And they need lots of servers for it. And they built it on somebody, I'm not sure who it was, it's either Amazon or Microsoft, one of those two, virtual machines. And I said, why are you not building this as a cloud service, our next thing, which is PaaS? And they said, we don't want vendor lock-in. I'll get back to that. So let me give you an example of an IaaS story. I teach PowerShell classes, and a large company said to me, come teach this class for us. I said, great. My plan had been, I was using VMware Workstation, okay? I was using VMware Workstation because I'm still learning Hyper-V. VMware Workstation was better than Hyper-V, but the Hyper-V with 8.1 is astounding. If you're using VMware Workstation now, look, and you have 8.1, and you haven't done a Hyper-V, figure it out, because it's good. So I had this virtual machine, and the idea was I was going to have 40 people in class bring their laptops. They'd run a virtual machine off VMware Workstation Player. They couldn't do that. Their laptops were not powerful enough to do that. Eek, I said. I didn't want to rent a bunch of machines. This was going to be expensive. So I said, let's look at the cloud. I took and I wanted to go to Azure, but I had VMware. Now, Microsoft has a thing called the Microsoft Virtual Machine Converter, which I tried 5 years ago, and it sucked dead donkeys through a garden hose. But I downloaded version 2, and it was awesome. It just took the hard disks, the virtual hard drives off my VMware box, converted them to a Hyper-V, and just moved them straight over. At that point, I have a Hyper-V server on my site. I just dropped those VHDs, that's what it's called, virtual hard drive, onto my Hyper-V site, checked that it worked great, terrific. So then I got an Azure account, I learned about Azure Storage, I took that virtual hard drive, uploaded it to Azure Storage, which then converted into something in a gallery. So I could then say, create a virtual machine, 2 clicks and I'm done. It was fantastic, it was super simple, very reasonably priced. But I needed to spin up 40 machines at a moment's notice. I needed some real flexibility. And how many of you here ever taught a hands-on class with machines? Anybody ever taught a tech class? You know, what always happens? Somebody breaks their machine, you need an assistant to go stand in the back for an hour, fix things up. Now, in no time at all, I had some commandlets called new-DC. These are domain controllers. Remove-DC. Had a dashboard that would show me. And how did I do it? Because I found out that PowerShell supported infrastructure as a service, which is why now I'm doing all my virtual machines on Azure, because that means I can use PowerShell. Okay? The net effect, and by the way, building these commandlets took no time at all. It was super, super simple. The net effect was that I could spin up these machines as quickly as I needed. It just made life tremendously simple. When someone did break a machine, which happened now and then, all I had to do was type 2 commands, delete his domain controller, build a new one, wait 10 minutes, he's back up and running. The only concern was I had to make sure that the hotel had good bandwidth. What would it have cost me to rent 40 machines and do this? I don't even want to think about it. Azure cost me $60 a day for 40 machines. All I needed was a promise of reliable bandwidth, and life was good. Making sense? Platform as a service is the most extensive. It is the most exotic of these. Platform as a service basically says, you're not running this on Windows. You're not running this on Linux. You're running it on some version of Linux or some version of Windows that is built to run not on one machine, but on many machines. That's the good news. The bad news is that means there's almost nothing that runs on one of these clouds. It's like having a new operating system. It's not quite like going from, I don't know, OS 2 to Windows, but it's something like that. So what that means is, on the one hand, you have to be concerned because you're going to have to write some new code. Now, there's some really good news, though, because the really good news is that even if you build the lamest Azure service, you know what you get automatically? You get a couple of things. So if we talk about Azure, I want to use Azure as the PaaS example. In the Azure world, Microsoft's taken a version of Windows Server and make it run on the cloud. It doesn't run on one machine, it runs on hundreds of thousands of machines. Microsoft will not talk about how many machines that they've purchased, but if we were to guess 1 million, we're probably not far off. Somewhere between 700,000 and 1 million machines, physical machines, is the guess for what's in Azure. Tremendous amount of hardware. And you essentially have, I'm simplifying, but you essentially have one operating system running on all of them. Another way to think of it is the world's largest ASP.NET hosting farm. That's a very simplified version, and my friend Mark Minasi would punch me on stage if I said that and he were in the room. But that's a way to think of it. You could take an existing ASP.NET application and do some work to convert it into an Azure cloud service. Making sense so far? What's my benefit? A couple of benefits. If you build the stupidest Azure cloud service in the world, it will scale easily. If you've ever tried to build an ASP.NET app that lets you scale to multiple machines, it's not hard, but it does involve some thinking. With Azure, it's dead stupid. If Azure, then scale. That's not exactly right, but it's close enough. So you get that capability. The other one, too, Azure gives you a phrase I like, agility. That's just my word. To me, cloud agility means 2 things. It means one is, first of all, you can scale. If your company's really slow in the summer, then you could just scale down and you're not paying as much for that time. Then maybe you're really busy in September and October and you can triple or quadruple in no time at all. So agile to me means be small when you need to be, large when you need to be. Agile also means when you fall down, you can get up. Azure Cloud Services assume that things are going to break. They don't think they might break. They assume things are going to break, and they just handle it. That's the beauty of it. That's the beauty of it. So you're doing some extra work, you get these two benefits, and you also get cheap. Cheap is important, but agile is why you're going to stay. Cheap brings you to the cloud. Agile keeps you in the cloud. The big win, though, is the disruption. How many of you here do code? How many of you build line of business applications in your organization? Does anybody do that? If you don't, trust me, I've done software. And every time you build a software project, the first thing you want to do when the project is done is blow it up and start all over again, because now you know how to do it right. Ask any developer, it's like that. So we like an opportunity to change now and then. And you know what I'm talking about. If you've been on Windows XP for 1,000,000 years, and it's finally time to go to Windows 7, you know you're going to upset the users. But while we're there, let's change all the other things we've been meaning to change. Does that sound familiar? Disruption is good. Disruption is good. So in other words, on the one hand, PaaS gives you an opportunity to get the immediate scaling. You also get, from an IT pro point of view, you may find this interesting. Think about what we're up against if we're putting something in the cloud on a standard Windows server. If you're putting anything on your premises or in the cloud on a standard Windows server, think about security. Have you ever tried to make sure that NTLM is out of your network altogether? You need to do it in the same way you wouldn't let LM in your network, and yet NTLM is far gone. Try building a system. You can do it with Server 2012 R2 and silos. It's not easy, and it breaks a lot of stuff. But now let's say you're building that as a cloud service. Well, the cloud service doesn't understand the 20th century. It doesn't understand the first part of the 21st century. It's built with today's problems and today's solutions in mind. So it's not an easy call. On the one hand, you get the disruption, you get the chance to shake things up that you need to shake up. The bad news, though, is if you spend 6 months building an app and Microsoft triples the cost of Azure, you're in trouble. Or anybody else, for that matter. So. Then there's software as a service. This is the easiest one. Take any commodity, anything that people use, mailboxes, for example. Yes, in the back end, there's a difference between an Exchange mailbox and a Google mailbox, but as far as your users are concerned, if you send me a piece of email, I have no way of knowing whether it came from an Exchange server on Office 365 or Google, except by poking through the SMTP headers. It's generic. Another example is web hosting. Web hosting could be called the oldest cloud service. It's generic, okay? DNS, yet another. I'll tell you, I have a SaaS experience I'll share with you. So I'm not going to tell you about email. Since 1991, I've been running my own domain. I've had my own C network, 256 routable addresses for the longest time and that sort of thing. Run my own routers and DNS and stuff, and it's a lot of fun. Of course, I was building it back in the days when everybody trusted everybody else on the internet. One of the things I've been doing was running my own DNS. Well, in 2011, people were attacking my site. You couldn't get to my website. I couldn't sell stuff. I looked into it, examined my network traces, and I found that I was the victim of something called an amplified DNS distributed denial of service attack. Anybody heard of one of those? Okay, if not, really? Let me tell you how they work. Here's the way they work. Starts out with this. We have a cowardly weasel who wants to attack someone, also known as slimeball, scumbag, or one of those other people. You have a hapless victim. The innocent victim is at 4.8.2.2, let's say. Oh, and then you have me. What the weasel does is the weasel says, hey, I heard there's this thing called ripe.net. I heard there's cool things there. Tell me everything you know about it. Now, the request for everything you know about ripe.net is about 300 bytes. My DNS server, oh, by the way, notice also that it's saying there, I want ripe.net, and my return address is 4.8.2.2. No, that's not right. He's lying. You could do that with DNS. It's awesome. So my system goes out, looks that information up, gets about 4,000 bytes of data, and sends it to the innocent victim. So what happened? The bad guy sent me 300 bytes. I sent 4,000 bytes to the victim. With me so far? And then we do somewhere between 100 and 1,000 times a minute for days. And that's why it's called the denial of service, because I don't have no DNS no mo. What happens at this point is that my attack on the DNS server meant I was out of business. Things were worse for the victim. The victim thought I was the scumbag. My cable company, which is Cox Cable. Is there anyone here from Cox Cable? No? Let's talk about them. I had to explain this to them. What was my answer? Azure did not or does not have a DNS service. I looked there first at the time. This is years ago. Azure did not have a DNS service. So Amazon has one called Route 53, because 53 is the port for DNS. And I hosted my stuff on there, and they're big monster bandwidth. I mean, it's hard to take these guys down, and I think they have smarter DNS servers. And so the problem was solved. Another happy cloud story. But wait, that's the really happy part. That's my monthly bill from Route 53. So. Which you could not buy a beer with in this country. So. There's also graphs. Graphs as a service. This is a more complex thing, but I want you to follow this. How many of you do Office 365? Anybody do Office 365? Okay. You are getting a totally awesome free thing that's happening. Microsoft, when they got Yammer, they got attached something called a graph. Now, graph is a phrase that doesn't make any sense, all right? Graph means network. We just don't use the word network because we use it for too many other things. In mathematics, graph theory is network theory. That's where this comes from. Okay? Anyway, because on Office 365, it's got your email, it's got your contacts, maybe your link connections, maybe it's looking at what you're doing in SharePoint. Microsoft took a leaf from Yammer when they bought Yammer. Yammer creates this social network so it knows which things you care about. Office 365 is starting to do that in your Office 365. So if you're using SharePoint, it knows what files you're using. If you're using Exchange, you are, of course, it knows who you email to the most. If you're using groups, which are in Office 365, associated with projects, then it knows who you're working with and what resources a particular project uses. This is kind of cool. So think about all the things that I don't know, that Google's been doing to you for years, keeping track of what kind of things you surf and whatever. Microsoft put a spy inside your organization that doesn't report back to Microsoft, it just reports to you. Called the Microsoft Graph. I think of it as GRAS, Graph as a Service. But think about a graph, think of like Facebook. So with Facebook, there's you, and then there's your friends, so that's kind of lines out that way, and the friends of friends, that's the graph. Facebook uses that to track you and make money. Microsoft's given you one in Office 365. Now, you don't know that, but under the hood, there's a tool that they announced last March, slowly coming into Office 365, called Delve. Has anyone played with Delve? Okay, the idea with Delve is it wants to take your files, your contacts, whatever, and make them into these cards that look kind of like Polaroids, old Polaroids. And when you say, I need information about something, like I've got a meeting with Joe, it knows that you're working with Joe on Project X, and it says you probably need these files. You probably need these data. It's a neat idea. It's a little clunky now. It may be cool in 3 years. If I were Microsoft, I would tell OneNote about Graph. That would be awesome. If you're not in love with OneNote yet, you need to give it a try because it's freaking awesome. And if OneNote knew as much about me as Graph does, I might not ever have to leave my house again. One day, POS could mean pizza as a service, you know. So. Hybrid cloud, you have to have a slide about hybrid cloud. I don't know why, because it's obvious to me. Hybrid cloud says don't entirely go into the cloud, keep some stuff on-prem. Gosh, that was a hard one, boy. So, identity as a service. This is very, very important. This is a next battle. This is an important battle that's going to happen. Watch it, track it, follow it. How many of you were doing IT in the late 80s, early 90s? Okay. In those days, you were getting started with email. You had your NT logon address as well as your Novell logon address, maybe. Then you went out and got an email package like CC Mail or FCC Mail, the way we knew it, and you had a name there. And that was a pain. You were doing 15 different sign-ons in your own organization. In 2000, Active Directory comes around, and you're single sign-on for a lot of your stuff. Now let's talk about the web. Wouldn't it be great to do single sign-on to the web? Well, that's the idea, is that somebody will ultimately be the identification most folks take. And I don't think it's going to be Facebook. I really don't. Facebook doesn't feel like the adult version of logon, you know. You don't get the feeling that, that adults are running that. But in terms of business ID, it could turn out to be your Google ID. It could turn out to be your Office 365 ID, perhaps an Azure ID or something along those lines. Now, Microsoft did a smart move when they priced Active Directory at a good rate. which is why businesses adopted it. It's not because they like Microsoft. It's because it was a good answer and it's a reasonably priced answer. Microsoft has a thing called Azure, and if you want all the goodies, Azure Active Directory, there's an Azure Active Directory Premium, which is $6 per person per month. I think that's too expensive. I think if Microsoft priced that more at $1 or $2, then between Office 365 and Azure, they could be the one identity that lets us get to everything. And right now, if you get an Azure ID, there's a doodad in Azure that allows you to create single sign-on from that. If you've not played with it, you should. You can essentially do it for free. It doesn't cost hardly anything. And if you're an MVP, you've got the tools that you need. So stuff that you should be looking at. So I think Microsoft's screwing up there. So I'm glad that you were all with me in the room for the last few minutes of my being a directory services MVP, because I'll probably get my ass kicked for that. So, clouds and organization use. I hear from an awful lot of people that if you're in a small or medium-sized business, well, you should be in the cloud. Like I'm an idiot because I'm not entirely in the cloud. If you hear this sort of thing, I have a couple of answers for you, okay? First of all, say to people, organizations don't go into the cloud. Organizations do not go into the cloud. Remember that. Applications do. You may move your mail, but you haven't moved to the cloud. Part of you has. That's A. B is, don't let anybody push you into that. There's always security reasons, there's privacy reasons, et cetera, and don't skip that stuff. Which leads me to trust privacy and the cloud. So how many of you provide public-facing services to your customers over the web? Any public-facing services? No, really? You don't host somebody else's HR stuff or whatever. You're very untrusting people, you Norwegians. Is that what you're telling me? Is that what this is? Well, for example, you also are putting services together that you're offering to your employees. Human resources services, other benefits, whatever. There's almost certainly a privacy policy there. Well, here's the thing. As we move to the cloud, there's this question of how can we offer a privacy policy to our clients if it's sitting on machines where we don't know their privacy policy. So a lot of you told me that you're in the cloud. I hope that you're going to keep reading privacy statements. They're getting worse. Please do this when there's a change. And by the way, you can make a change. I have complained to Microsoft about things and actually changed a few things over the years. Not many, but I have. And other MVPs have. And you can as customers as well. So keep reading privacy statements, or really what I mean is start reading privacy statements, okay? So don't bother doing it with Facebook, because you know that there's nothing there. If you've never seen this cartoon before, it's been around the web for a while. It's not, basically isn't this great? We got to pay nothing for the barn and the food's free, and if you're not paying for it, you are not your customer. You are not the customer, you're the product they're selling. Now, if it's a free service, that's what's going to happen. Get over it, I'm sure Twitter knows way more about me than I need for them to know. Along those lines, very, 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 very important. Watch the Microsoft Ireland case. Short version. In the latter part of 2013, the US government wants access to the email and files of someone. I don't know who the person is. It's hard to get this information. The person's files happen to be sitting on a Microsoft data center. That's easy. So the feds go to Microsoft and they say, hey, we want to see this guy's email and files. Microsoft says, we can't do that. And the federal guys say, did you not notice we have large guns and warrants? Microsoft guys said, here's the problem. That data is sitting in a data center in Dublin in Ireland. The feds are like, so? Microsoft says, well, the thing is, they're a separate country. They're a sovereign nation. And we're not even bombing them. So, hey, let me warn all you guys. I lived in D.C. for 20 years. My understanding is that the United States has identified another country that is under the cruel rule of a king and has oil. So we're going to liberate you guys any day now. Yeah. These days I wish I had a different kind of passport. But anyway, so this is the amazing thing. It's like you would think that this would be really obvious, but it's astounding. But a lot of post-9/11 paranoia. And so they went to this judge in New York. It's a federal judge in New York, and the federal judge in New York said in April, no, you got to honor this. It's like insane. Then they tossed it back to the next level. Another judge in July said, no, you got to honor it, which is scaring the living crap out of me. And now it's in the Second Court of Appeals. Watch it. Google, everybody you can name, have HP, et cetera, have issued amicus curiae, friends of the court briefs. This is a really, if this goes through, and if the feds actually say to Microsoft, you have to surrender this information, all of the big cloud services are American companies. I mean, whatever they do to Microsoft, they're going to do to Google and everybody else. Watch this closely, because if they actually force Microsoft to do this, it will destroy the cloud industry in the United States, which would be bad, you know. But please do this. Ask a cloud vendor, because when I was in TechEd Barcelona a couple of years ago, there was a guy doing Office 365 talk. About 3 years ago, I just got my Office 365. I thought, let me just go look this over. And somebody asked that guy, are you data mining our email? And I didn't know the answer to that question, so I was listening for the answer. So some poor product manager at Microsoft, and this is what the guy said. He said, okay, that was the mistake. That was the mistake. I mean, because I'm sure he doesn't know. I mean, the guy's like at 32nd level, you know, no power. And so I checked. One of my best buddies is Mark Minasi, you know Mark. And Mark and I did a thing on stage in Barcelona, and I said, so are you reading our mail? And he said no, and he wouldn't lie to me, you know, unless, if I could catch him. So that's the question. Are you mining my data? Have you asked that of your cloud vendors? Please tell me that you're asking that of your cloud vendors. How are you protecting my contacts? Epsilon was an organization that would do emailing for other companies. 4 or 5 years ago, one of its administrators left and took email addresses with it. You probably got some privacy statements. You know? I don't like the fact that these companies delegated this to an organization that could not be trusted. In what country or countries do my data reside? You could do that with Azure services. Azure will tell you exactly where your data is. I can't easily find out with Office 365 where my data is. But what I'm saying is, would you want to know that your data was sitting on servers in Russia? Just asking. You know? So you want to be able to know that stuff. And that leads me to Minasi's law of cloud trust. And that is, nothing tells you more about a cloud vendor than how they handle an outage. Google never has outages, just ask them. Amazon had an almost 4-day outage a couple of Aprils ago and had to be pinned to the mat to explain what's going on. They've gotten better. So the vendors are getting better. Dropbox never has, you know, they never have outages. You know. What Microsoft does is interesting. Microsoft's approach is to say, well, you know that's the thing. We had an outage. Can I tell you about it? And they have this like 50-page white paper that explains exactly what the attack did and exactly where it attacked and how that cascaded. And this is the code they changed. And you're asleep before you get to the 17th page. But you feel good that, you know, at least they've got that information. So my hat's off to them on that one, okay? You know? So. Let's talk some more about some predictions. What's going to happen in the future? Do you want to know the future? Of course we do. Let's put on our economist hats. So the cloud business is already becoming, and almost certainly will become, something called an oligopoly. If you didn't do Economics 101, I'll remind you, oligopolies are like monopolies, but not quite as bad. An oligopoly is an industry where there's a small number of large players. Examples, oil. You know, you go to any particular place, there's only a few large oil companies. Airlines. You don't typically have 50 airlines in a country. You know? If you're going from city A to city B in the United States, you've probably only got 3 airlines to pick. You know? In the United States, wireless providers. You guys don't have this problem as far as I can see, but in the United States, for some reason, we have a rule that every city has 2 wireless providers because they won't collude or anything like that. And so what you end up happening is it's basically like Verizon and somebody else, and the somebody else is either AT&T or T-Mobile. So my government has created a really, really, really bad situation. I don't know if you know how bad cell service is in the United States. We get charged for incoming minutes as well as outgoing minutes. Data is insanely expensive, and of course you know the craziness that when you cross a country border, all of a sudden it's 1985 and you don't have data on your smartphone anymore. So this is bad stuff. All right, so what do we know about oligopolies? We know there will be price wars. There will be price wars. I guarantee you the following things will happen. They're already happening. Player A and player B. When player A cuts his or her price, they're doing that specifically because what's going to happen is you're going to have services that are very, very similar. And if one cloud vendor cuts his or her price, they'll suck up some of the market share. But here's the problem. What should the other player do? Should the other oligopolist cut their price? Well, you know, the thing is, player A, by cutting his or her price, is reducing their revenue. They got more market share, but they're reducing their revenue. Player B, well, if player B plays along, crap. Now we've got the same market share, but we're making less money. Oh, bummer. That's phase one. Phase two is, I guarantee you that within the next 8 years, 2 or more cloud providers will be caught in a hotel room having a meeting about fixing prices. Happens every time with oligopolists. Now, what ends up happening, though, in our day and age is that it is possible to do it implicitly. That is to say, because cloud prices are easily discoverable, it becomes easy for an implicit price fixing to occur. Another thing called parallel exclusion. Parallel exclusion means once you've got 5 big players, 4 big players, a 5th or 6th entering will be almost impossible. And why? Well, let's see. If I'm a cloud provider, what do I really need? I need bandwidth. How much do you want to bet that Microsoft and Google and Amazon will be ISPs in 5 years? The logical thing for them to do is down-level stuff and start buying up ISPs and buying up bandwidth. And by the way, maybe there's only so much. If you wanted to come in as a cloud provider, you might find that there's nobody willing to sell you that bandwidth. And then anti-consumer behaviors. If you look at the back of an airline ticket, the things you agree to are absolutely horrendous, but it's a contract you have no choice about. This is a classic behaviors. If you want to see a nice book about it here, Barry Lynn's got a book called Cornered. So read that, and you'll understand more about what's going to happen with the business. That make sense? Many economists argue quite intelligently that if you really only have 2 or 3 big players, and we're talking international players, because again, whoever's the big cloud dog is going to be international. They will have locations in China, they will have locations in Japan, they will have locations in Europe, they will have locations in North America, South America, okay? So they're almost like monopolies. It is not then impossible to imagine that in 10 years there could be 2 big players. Think about how many computers these people would have to support half the IT. If each of them is doing roughly half the IT in the world, how many computers are we talking about? We're talking about something big and beautiful and complex and cool and fragile. I actually could tell you a story about something that happened like that. But it's a story you've even heard before. But let me tell you some more about it, okay? This story begins in the 1500s. In Ireland, well, they weren't growing a lot of food. There wasn't enough food being grown for various reasons. Political issues, not worth discussing, but in any case, they had a neighbor they were having disagreements with, okay? Well, from the Americas, exploration started in the Americas, and the Incas have taken a poisonous nightshade, a deadly poisonous plant, tuber, and they've made it edible. It comes across the pond to Europe. Belgium becomes one of the world's largest producers of potatoes, and so does Ireland. For Ireland, it's fantastic, and here's why. It's an idea that came from the Americas that increased productivity by 2.5 times. An acre, about 0.4 hectares, planted with wheat or corn, could support 2 people for 10 months every year. Take that same land, plant potatoes on it. 1 acre of potatoes could support a family of 5 for 12 months. Amazing productivity increases. It's a dietary wonder. Produces every single thing you need, vitamin and mineral-wise, except for vitamin A. And the way you get around that is you have some buttermilk or some milk in the morning. The result here is absolutely insane. I mean, there's a particular kind of potato called the lumper that everybody settles on because it's really hardy. You can grow the lumper in land you couldn't do. This is land you couldn't do wheat in if you needed it. This is land you couldn't do corn in if you needed it. This was a godsend. What's the result? Adult Irish men are eating 12 to 15 pounds, 6 kilos of potatoes every day. If you are in the 1700s, if you're a bottom of the barrel, lowest, dirt poor Irishman, you're living better than a dirt poor Englishman at this point. Changes everything. They've got so much land left over that they can start bringing cattle in, and they can start selling beef to England, and it's an astoundingly productive, very, very useful export. It's just an all-around great news story. It also makes the Irish able to flourish in a way they never could. 8 million doesn't sound like a lot, but for Ireland, it's a huge number. It's an absolutely huge number. And this is by 1846. Unfortunately, the New World also brought something else. People say it's a fungus, but it isn't actually. It's more related to brown kelp. It's called Phyllothera infestans, also known as the potato blight or the late blight. It appeared in Europe. So potatoes first appear in Ireland in 1588 or 1587, and about 200 years later, they start popping up, and the Belgium crop has been damaged. Hasn't hit Ireland until the 11th of September, 1847. This is when the blight first appears. Now, that's the middle of September. From the middle of September to the middle of October is the end of the crop season. Halfway through October is when they bring in the crop, and the number that they've brought in is half the normal size. So this has cut the resources in half. This is so bad that there were reports that when you first saw the blight on a field, it would only take 2 hours for it to destroy the field. Result, 1 million people died. The blight never really went away. Remember that name, Phyllothorans infestan. It's now back, it keeps evolving, and it's starting to damage potato crops all around the world. But that's another story. Okay? The blight really never went away. And that's why to this day, the population of Ireland is only 4.78 million. Okay? What if someone had said, hey, this land is getting more productive, but wouldn't it be a better idea if we were to do something with some of that land? Maybe grow something different, grow different kinds of potatoes, or maybe grow some other wheat and so on. What I'm saying is that, I don't mean to sound negative there. I hope I presented some positive and some negative. I'm saying that the cloud will save you so much money. The immediate cost savings is just so undeniable that it's great. But I'm saying, understand, there's going to be outages. You can't run these things and not have problems. Look at the Azure outage. It just happened, And bear in mind that you get locked into a vendor, there can be sudden price jumps. Remember, anybody here do SQL? What happened 2 Novembers ago? Microsoft doubled the price of SQL Server overnight. And you know why they did it? Because they can. Any vendor could do that. Many vendors have done that. So let's take some of that cloud savings and save it for a rainy day. Does that sound like a good idea? And how many of you have disaster recovery as part of your job? Anybody do DR? Okay, I want to see all the hands next time I'm talking, okay? Disaster recovery is important. Business continuity is important. How many of you have a disaster recovery plan in your organization? Okay. How many of you came in one Saturday with a bunch of machines and the backups and actually tried it out? See, because if you have a disaster recovery plan you've never tried, you don't have a disaster recovery plan. What you have is a particularly expensive, high-tech form of prayer. Now, prayer can have a role in disaster recovery, but if the cloud goes away or the cloud gets too expensive, that's a disaster. Please have a plan. Try the plan. And remember, what's it going to cost? Figure that cost out before you go into the cloud. Seem reasonable? Let's take away just 5 final words. First, cheap. That's why you're here. It's not why you're going to stay, but it's why you're here. But remember, it's not as cheap as you think it is. Invest some of that money someplace else. Agile. That's why you should stay. The ability to be small when you need to be and large when you need to be. And to be able to weather the many, many problems that will happen because the data center you deal with in 10 years is going to be very, very much more complicated than the one you're doing now. Don't worry about your job unless you don't keep up on this stuff. Disruptive. Disruptions are good. They give us a chance to go back and fix the things we've needed to. You have a security disaster coming over the horizon. We're seeing the first start of it with the patches that came down today. If you haven't been paying attention to pass the hash, Pay attention to pass the hash. But we're never going to be able to solve that problem unless we uproot the security and rebuild it. And one of the things we could do with disruption is that's an opportunity to rip up the security and rebuild it. Fragile. Remember that these structures that we're building, the more complex, the more powerful, and the more productive they are, the more fragile they are. Again, needs for DR. And trust. Remember Minasi's law? You never learn as much about a cloud vendor as when you have an outage. So. Give me just a minute here. First of all, you guys came in early. I really appreciate that because it's just a keynote, and you never know whether they're going to tell you anything of any value at all, all right? Did you learn something? A little bit? All right, one more piece of advice. This place astounds me. Again, the program they've got here, great speakers, terrific. I mean, if it was only 70, I think Michael said it was 77 sessions. This is a great show. You guys have got a great show here. It's like someone took the best of tech ed, distilled it, and then aged it in barrels. Not as old as me, but, old. So it's a great opportunity to make use of every single session. Thank you. And remember to use this knowledge for good and not for evil. Bye-bye. Thank you.